Whitney Houston is one of the biggest names to ever make it into the music industry, and over a decade after her untimely passing, she continues to be regarded as a huge influence on younger artists. Let's take a look at her life and how she became iconic. Whitney was born in 1963 in a middle-income neighborhood of Newark, New Jersey. Her family had moved there during the Great Migration. Her mother, Cissy, was encouraged from an early age to sing, go to church, and get an education. She married in 1955, but divorced 2 years later. She would have her first child during that marriage, NBA player Gary Garland. The same year, she met John Russell Houston Jr., a World War II veteran who was now working as a taxi and truck driver. The couple had a son, Michael, in 1961, and Whitney, born when Cissy was 29 years old. Cissy and John would marry the next year, as soon as his divorce was finished. From an early age, Whitney was known as Nippy to those close to her. Music was clearly important for the family. Two of Whitney's cousins were Didi and Dionne Warwick. Furthermore, her godmother was Darlene Love. On top of that, Aretha Franklin became an honorary aunt of Whitney when the two met at a studio when Whitney was a child, as her mother was doing backups for Aretha. Cissy also sang backup vocals for other A-listers of the era, such as Jimi Hendrix, Roberta Flack, Dusty Springfield, Bette Midler, and Elvis Presley. At the same time, church played a big role for Whitney, who began performing as a soloist at her church junior gospel choir, aged 11. There she also learned how to play the piano. Because their mother was away so much with her work, the three kids would often stay with other families until she returned. Whitney would often be bullied for being light-skinned by those in the African American community who had darker skin. Following the 1967 Newark riots, the family moved to East Orange, a city nearby Newark. In the 2018 documentary Whitney, her brother Gary claimed Didi Warwick molested them as children, although the rest of the family wouldn't support this claim. As a teenager, Whitney herself began singing background vocals for the likes of Chaka Khan, while also touring nightclubs with her mother. In 1977, her parents legally separated, but would divorce only in 1991. As a teen, Whitney began experimenting with drugs, including weed and occasionally cocaine, according to her brother Michael, who claimed he procured them for her. At the age of 16, Whitney met Robin Crawford, who would become her best friend, roommate when Whitney, aged 18, moved in with her, and later her executive assistant. Whitney's family strongly opposed this relationship, especially since it was believed to be a romantic one. Whitney graduated from the private Catholic school for girls, Mount St. Dominic Academy, in 1981, and soon started modeling for the likes of Cosmopolitan, Seventeen, and Glamour. But her goal continued to be the music industry. She often performed with her mother in New York nightclubs and even received offers from record labels, including Elektra. Finally, in 1983, Whitney signed a record deal with Arista Records, the label of Clive Davis. She also made her TV debut that year during the Merv Griffin Show, where she performed a song from The Wiz, Home. It would be 2 years until her debut album would eventually be released, as Clive signed Whitney in order to be sure that no other label would get her. In the meantime, in the spring of 1984, she released a duet with Teddy Pendergrass, titled Hold Me, which reached the top 40 in several European countries, the top 5 on the US R&B chart, and number 46 on the Hot 100. Finally, on Valentine's Day 1985, her self-titled debut album was released, and it was a smash success, topping the Billboard 200 chart for 14 weeks in 1986. It also was the best-selling album of 1986 in Australia, Canada, and Switzerland, plus the US, where it would become the third best-selling album of the 80s, behind Thriller and Born in the USA. In 1989, the Guinness Book of World Records had named it the best-selling album ever for a female artist, with 14 million copies sold. It has since sold over 25 million copies. It is currently the 44th best-selling album in history. The album received mostly positive reviews, with special praise towards Whitney's voice, although some critics believed the album to be safe and formulaic. Her first solo single was You Give Good Love, which was originally meant only to establish Whitney to the Black American audience. It did, reaching number 1 on the R&B chart, but it also became a crossover hit, reaching number 3 on the Hot 100. Meanwhile, All at Once was released outside the country and became a top 5 hit in Belgium and the Netherlands. Saving All My Love for You was her first international single, and topped the US, UK, Canadian and Irish charts, and top 20 positions in all other charts. 2 other singles followed, How Will I Know and Greatest Love of All, which also topped the US chart, making Whitney the first album by a solo female artist to produce 3 number 1 singles. The songs also became top 10 hits in most music markets. The album received 5 Grammy nominations, including Album of the Year and Record of the Year for Greatest Love of All, winning Best Female Pop Vocal Performance for Saving All My Love for You. But Whitney was facing a problem most black artists had. MTV refused to play their music videos. Notable exceptions to this rule included Michael Jackson, Donna Summer and Tina Turner, who were considered rock artists. You Give Good Love was refused for being quote-unquote too R&B, while Saving All My Love for You only received light rotation after it became a number 1 hit. Whitney commented, quote-unquote, "They had no choice but to play the video. I love it when they have no choice." Thanks to its colorful video and the song clearly on its way to become a hit, MTV added How Will I Know to heavy rotation soon after it was released. Whitney had broken the color barrier for black women on MTV, the biggest music channel, which reached over 25 million households. Between July and December of 1986, she embarked on her first world tour, reaching North America, Western Europe, Japan and Australia. The tour was a success and received positive reviews. Whitney also received 6 nominations at the American Music Awards, winning 2, while How Will I Know won Best Female Video at the VMAs. Billboard also named her as the top pop artist of 1986. In June of 1987, she released her second album, called Whitney, which would go on to make Whitney the first female artist to debut at number 1 on the Billboard album chart. It topped 12 other charts, including those in Australia, Japan, Germany, Italy, and the UK. The album would go on to become the 6th best-selling album of the 80s in the UK. Despite this, reviews were more mixed, as critics felt Whitney just followed in the footsteps of her debut album, being formulaic and not very original. 4 of its singles would go on and top the Billboard Hot 100, thus giving Whitney 7 consecutive number 1s, surpassing the previous record of 6 held by Bee Gees and the Beatles. The lead single, I Wanna Dance With Somebody Who Loves Me, was an international number 1, topping charts from South Africa to Sweden. Second single, Didn't We Almost Have It All, became her 5th song to top the Billboard Adult Contemporary chart and was a top 20 hit in most countries. The project received 3 Grammy nominations, including Album of the Year, and 1 Best Female Pop Vocal Performance for I Wanna Dance With Somebody. She would embark on her second world tour, Moment of Truth, during 1987 and 1988, with 147 shows in total, including 80 in North America and 15 in Japan. The last single from the album, Love Will Save the Day, broke Whitney's streak of number 1 songs in the US, peaking at number 9. It was also a top 10 hit around the world. In August of 1988, she released the song One Moment in Time, the anthem of that year's Summer Olympic Games. It peaked at number 5 in the US, while it became her third number 1 in the UK and second in Germany. Whitney also got involved in several concerts and events that raised awareness and money to bring an end to the apartheid in South Africa. But while she was conquering the world, back home in the US, the black community wasn't very pleased with her. She even got nicknamed Whitney Houston. Because of the way she was speaking and dressing, and because her records weren't as soulful as her live concerts, the black community accused her of selling out. When her name was called out as one of the nominees at the Soul Train Music Awards, both in 1988 and 1989, the crowd booed Whitney. Whitney was very hurt of the reaction from the black audiences and declared, quote-unquote, "If you're gonna have a long career, there's a certain way to do it, and I did it that way. I'm not ashamed of it," end of quote, and denied that she was acting white. Taking the criticism into consideration, wanting more creative control, and being inspired by Bobby Brown's Don't Be Cruel New Jack Swing sound, she took control over her next project, becoming an executive producer for what would become her third studio album, I'm Your Baby Tonight. The record divided critics, with some praising the change in sound, while others didn't find it too believable. Commercially, the album was a success, although not at the same level as her previous two records, also topping the Greek and US R&B hip-hop charts. It peaked at number 3 in the US and the top 10 in most countries. Although it sold 10 million copies, that was half of what the previous album sold. The title track and lead single enjoyed the most success, reaching the top 10 internationally and peaked at number 1 in the US, her 8th number 1 hit there, and tying her with Madonna as the female artist with the most number 1s in the history of Billboard Hot 100. The second single, All the Men That I Need, also topped the US charts. It was her third single to top the Hot 100, Adult Contemporary, and Hot R&B charts, after Saving All My Love for You and How Will I Know. The other singles from the album failed to achieve the same level of success though. Whitney also toured for this album, although it received mixed reviews for relying too much on big production instead of a more intimate setting, but she was praised for how soulful she sounded. The tour did well commercially, although it wasn't sold out in any of the cities where data is available. In January of 1991, Whitney sang the national anthem at the Super Bowl. At a time of high levels of patriotism in the US due to the recent Persian Gulf War, and combined with a rendition that was universally praised, Arista released the recording as a single. It peaked at number 20 on the Hot 100. This was the first time that the national anthem became a top 20 hit. Following the 9/11 attacks, the single was re-released and reached number 6 on the Hot 100, the only time the composition entered the top 10, making it a bona fide hit. In March of the same year, she hosted her first ever solo televised concert, titled Welcome Home Heroes, for HBO. This was a free concert for the returning servicemen and women from the war. It was also shown for free on HBO, giving the network its highest ratings at the time. Also in 1991, it was confirmed that Whitney and Bobby Brown were dating. This came as a surprise, as Whitney was known for her clean, good girl image, while Bobby was seen as a bad boy. Nonetheless, the pair would go on to marry in July of 1992, and in March of 1993, Whitney gave birth to her only child, Bobby Christina. But just a couple of months prior, Whitney released her biggest project, The Bodyguard. The romantic drama thriller featured Whitney in her first movie role and co-starring Kevin Costner. The film wasn't well received by critics and received 7 nominations at the Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Picture and 2 for Whitney's performance. Despite this, the film was a huge success, being the second highest grossing film of the year behind Aladdin and one of the highest grossing films ever. But it was the soundtrack album that managed to break incredible records. It peaked at number 1 in 18 countries, including Australia, Germany, Japan, and the US, where it spent 20 weeks at number 1, the most for a female artist, a record surpassed by Adele with 21. Internationally, it became the best-selling album of the 1990s, the best-selling soundtrack ever, and the best-selling album by a female artist, ranking at number 3 overall. The first single, I Will Always Love You, was also a smash hit, topping just about any chart where it entered, from Australia to Panama and from France to the US. Over 24 charts topped. It became the first song in US history to spend 14 weeks at number 1, and became the first female song to be certified 4 times platinum, eventually going diamond for 10 million sales and streams. It's currently tied for the 6th place among the best-selling singles in world history, and ranks as the best-selling one female artist with over 20 million copies sold. The song also won several awards, including 2 Grammys for Record of the Year and Best Pop Vocal Performance Female. 2 other singles from the album, Run to You and I Have Nothing, received Academy Award nominations for Best Original Song. The first song was a moderate hit, while the latter reached the top 10 in several countries, including the UK and the US, while it topped the Canadian chart. I'm Every Woman, the second single, was also an international top 10 hit and topped dance charts. The Bodyguard World Tour reached North and South America, Asia, Europe, and Africa. Her concerts in South Africa were the first by a major artist after the fall of apartheid. The tour was also a critical success. Sadly, during this time, Whitney and Bobby began to have some marriage problems, and his erratic behavior was always in the news. Related or not, during this time, Whitney began using more drugs. Following the success of the Bodyguard project, Whitney decided to focus on being a singer-actress, so her next project was Waiting to Exhale, a movie focusing on the lives of 4 African-American women. The movie received mostly positive reviews and was a big hit at the box office internationally, thus helping other films focusing on the African-American experience to be greenlit. Whitney recorded 3 songs for the soundtrack, with the lead single Exhale, Shoop Shoop, becoming the 3rd song ever to debut atop the Billboard Hot 100. It also became her 2nd biggest hit on the R&B chart. In 1996, she appeared with Denzel Washington in a remake of The Bishop's Wife, called The Preacher's Wife. The film received mixed to positive reviews, but underperformed at the box office. Nevertheless, Whitney recorded several songs for its soundtrack, which would go on to become the best-selling gospel album. I Believe in You and Me became a top 5 hit in the US, while Step by Step was an international top 20. By that time, Whitney was using drugs, sadly, every day. In 1997, her production company created a remake of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella. The lead role was played by Brandy, while Whitney played the fairy godmother. The production received mostly critical acclaim and was a smash hit in the ratings, with over 60 million people watching it. In 1998, Whitney recorded a duet with Mariah Carey for the Prince of Egypt soundtrack. This was notable for the fact that the media had pitted the 2 against each other since Mariah's debut in 1990, due to the so-called similar singing styles. Whitney had always downplayed the rivalry, commenting that any similarities that might exist simply come from having the same musical influences. The pair performed the duet on The Oprah Winfrey Show and at the Academy Awards, where the song won the Best Original Song trophy. Their performance received critical acclaim, despite Whitney initially missing the rehearsals. The single reached success in Europe, reaching the top 10. In the US, it got to number 15, which was seen as a disappointment, considering the popularity of the 2 singers at the time. It was later decided to make the song the lead single from Whitney's first studio album in 8 years, My Love Is Your Love. The album received critical acclaim and received 6 Grammy nominations. It won Whitney her sixth and final Grammy for It's Not Right, But It's Okay in the Best Female R&B Vocal Performance. Despite the critical acclaim and the anticipation, the album only reached number 13 on the US chart, which was seen as a disappointment. Most explain the lackluster performance due to the fact that the same week several big names also released projects, including Mariah, Ice Cube, Jewel, Method Man, and Garth Brooks. It received a much warmer commercial performance in Europe, where it became the second best-selling album of 1999 after Cher's Believe. The second single, Heartbreak Hotel with Faith Evans and Kelly Price, reached number 2 on the Hot 100 and became Whitney's 8th song to top the R&B chart. The next two singles, It's Not Right But It's Okay and My Love Is Your Love, would both become top 5 hits in the US, with the title track especially enjoying success in Europe. The last single, I Learned From the Best, was less successful, but still topped the charts in Poland and Romania. All singles were also highly successful on the Billboard dance charts. The My Love Is Your Love tour visited Europe and North America. The European leg was the highest grossing arena tour of the year and also enjoyed US success, although many dates were cancelled citing illness. She also appeared on VH1's Divas Live with Tina Turner, Cher, and Brandy. In 2000, Whitney released her first Greatest Hits album, which received mostly positive reviews and was a commercial success, eventually selling over 10 million copies worldwide. The lead single, Could I Have This Kiss Forever, a duet with Enrique Iglesias, became an European top 10 hit. The same year, Robin Crawford left Whitney's management company. By that time, Whitney's behavior changed a lot, departing from the good girl image she had in the 80s and early 90s. She would often be late or cancel photo shoots, interviews, concerts, and TV appearances, including her performance at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which was honoring Clive Davis. She was also fired from the performance she was scheduled to do at the Academy Awards for her behavior. Although the public didn't know, Whitney was heavily abusing drugs, and those close to her had already tried to convince her to go to rehab. Still, the next year, in August 2001, Whitney signed a $100 million contract with Arista and BMG for 6 new albums. The next month, she appeared at the Michael Jackson 30th anniversary special, where her appearance and weight loss sparked public debate about her drug use. In 2002, while the record company was waiting for her new album, she was sued by her father's company, which claimed responsibility for Whitney's $100 million contract with Arista. Her father would eventually pass away in early 2003, and the lawsuit was dismissed a year later. In late 2002, Whitney was interviewed by Diane Sawyer, a PR move which backfired. While initially denying that she was too skinny because of drugs and not eating, she would go to confirm as the interview progressed that she sometimes goes a long time without eating due to stress and that she's used alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, and pills, although she denied being addicted. She also confirmed that Bobby is sometimes jealous of her, before he stepped in to deny it. Furthermore, Whitney admitted to having hit Bobby, although she denied he ever hit her. The album Just Whitney was released a week later and peaked at number 9 in the US, although it didn't do well internationally. It also received mixed reviews from critics, especially due to its defiant nature against the negative reports regarding her then lifestyle. It was also her first album released without Clive Davis, as he was replaced from his position by L.A. Reid. The first single, What You Looking At, became a top 3 hit in Canada and top 40 in Europe, but it only got to number 96 in the US. 3 other singles followed, but they failed to gain success, although the last single, Love That Man, became her 12th chart topper on the dance chart in the US. In November of 2003, Whitney released One Wish, the holiday album, a Christmas album. The release received mixed reviews due to Whitney's vocal performance, and peaked at number 49 on Billboard 200, but number 5 on the holiday albums. A month later, Bobby was charged with battery, with police reporting that Whitney had injuries on her face. She had several concerts in 2004 and appeared on Bravo's Being Bobby Brown. The show received negative reviews and contributed even more to the downfall of Whitney in the eyes of the public. Bravo and Bobby were also accused of using Whitney for clout to attract viewership. Indeed, after announcing she won't appear on the second season, the show was cancelled. That year and the next one, she entered rehab. For the next couple of years, photos of Whitney looking worse and worse continuously appeared in the media, which was by then not taking pity on her anymore, but actively mocking her and how far she had fallen. But in 2007, she finally divorced Bobby Brown and started working on getting her life together again. Whitney returned to the spotlight in late 2009 when she released her seventh studio album, I Look to You. It received mostly positive reviews from critics, who praised how much deeper and huskier her voice had become. The album also enjoyed commercial success, debuting at number 1 on the Billboard album chart. It was her first number 1 since The Bodyguard. It was an international success, topping the charts of Canada, Germany, Italy, Poland, and the Netherlands. 2 singles were released from the album, the title track and $1 Million Bill. They charted moderately around the world, with I Look to You topping the Brazilian chart and $1 Million Bill reaching the UK top 5. The next month, she appeared on The Oprah Show, where she admitted to using drugs, to Bobby being emotionally abusive, and that, despite going to rehab, she still had the urge to do drugs. The public was sympathetic to Whitney opening up, and it looked like she was finally back. That sentiment would soon start to change ever so slightly when she began her international tour. Several performances were cancelled due to illness, and despite selling well, both fans and critics felt disappointed due to Whitney's vocal performance and inability to properly hit the notes. Still, these years helped Whitney and her daughter get closer, as they didn't have the greatest relationship during Whitney's dark years. In 2011, she returned to rehab, but she also appeared in a remake of the film Sparkle with Jordan Sparks, which was filmed in October and November of that year. In February 2012, Whitney was found unconscious, submerged in the bathtub. She was soon pronounced dead. Whitney Houston passed away aged 48 due to heart disease and cocaine use. The reports mention she had used cocaine shortly before her death. Traces of at least 4 other drugs were found in her body. Knowing all of this, the highs and the lows, what exactly makes Whitney Houston iconic? Whitney Houston is regarded first and foremost as one of the greatest singers of all time, being ranked as such both by the general public and music critics. Having a spinto-soprano vocal range, Whitney had a range of about 3 octaves, similar to artists such as Chris Brown, Kate Bush, Kelly Clarkson, Usher, or Kelly Rowland, although some debate she could extend over 4 or 5 octaves. This confusion comes from the fact that Whitney had great breath support, truly using her voice as an instrument. Even when singing a note that wasn't necessarily low for a woman, her rich tone made it sound lower than it actually was. This means that she usually sung in the middle and upper registers. As a result, Whitney became known as The Voice, which honestly is by far one of the biggest honorific titles one could receive. She is also a part of the so-called vocal trinity alongside Mariah Carey and Celine Dion. This nickname refers to the fact that the 3 of them dominated the music industry in the 90s, with their big, powerful voices and astronomical sales of albums and singles. Whitney isn't necessarily known as much for her stage persona, although her excessive sweating when performing was often lampooned in the media. If there's one performance of Whitney's that blows all of the other ones, is her performance of the US national anthem at the Super Bowl in 1991. Even if the vocals were pre-recorded, you know she could sing, and it was a technical decision to have the mic turned off. Nonetheless, the performance is a staple in US entertainment history, and one that every singer tries to emulate. Many of Whitney's songs became international hits, including Greatest Love of All, I'm Your Baby Tonight, and My Love Is Your Love. But her two best-known songs are by far I Wanna Dance With Somebody and I Will Always Love You, these two being her signature songs. I Will Always Love You is also the best-selling physical single by a female artist ever, with over 20 million copies distributed worldwide. This success has helped Whitney become one of the best-selling artists of all time as well, with 200 million sales, the sixth highest placement for a female artist. The Bodyguard soundtrack is the third best-selling album ever, with 45 million copies sold worldwide. Her first two albums also sold in excess of over 20 million copies. She has also established several records around the world, such as the only artist to have 7 consecutive number ones on the Billboard Hot 100, The Preacher's Wife being the best-selling gospel album of all time, winning 8 American Music Awards in one night in 1994, the most for a female artist, and many more. Up until the late 2000s and early 2010s, Whitney was the most awarded female singer ever, a record surpassed since by Beyoncé. Whitney is also remembered as an actress, despite the fact that she's appeared in only 5 feature films and 1 TV movie. But they had immense impact. The Bodyguard became, back then, one of the highest grossing movies in history. The success of Waiting to Exhale opened the door for Hollywood to produce more mainstream movies with African American women in leading roles, while Cinderella remains a fan favorite for kids and adults alike. Sadly, there was also a darker side to Whitney's life that the public, in a masochistic way, loved to see. It all started with the marriage to Bobby Brown, one of the oddest celebrity couples ever, as she was the sweet girl next door and he was a bad boy playboy who constantly had problems with the law. Soon enough, she got dragged into Bobby's mess and her usage of drugs, including hard ones, increased. In the early 2000s, it became clear to the public that Whitney must have had health problems or a drug addiction due to how skinny she had become. In 2002, she was a part of one of the most infamous celebrity interviews with Diane Sawyer, in which she confirmed to using several types of drugs, including cocaine and pills, and that there was physical violence between her and Bobby. Regarding her drug use, one theory is that it was a way of coping with her sexuality. Many close friends of Whitney and family members confirmed that she and Robin Crawford had been in a romantic relationship. But there was a huge stigma to being gay during the 80s, and although rumors existed since then, they were naturally denied. Furthermore, she had no support system, as her own mother would later declare on Oprah she wouldn't have accepted Whitney being a lesbian or bisexual. Her tragic and sudden death at the age of 48 is sadly also a part of her legacy, as she was found submerged in water, with the cause of death being attributed to recent drug use and coronary artery disease. The same night, the pre-Grammy party organized by Clive Davis went as planned, although it was turned into a tribute to Whitney, which, if you ever needed proof of how messed up things can be in Hollywood... 3 years later, 2 weeks before the anniversary of Whitney's death, Bobbi Kristina was also found submerged in a bathtub. It was later revealed she died from lobar pneumonia. She was 22 years old and Whitney's only child. There is also the race controversy in the early days of Whitney's career, as some in the African American community perceived her as being whitewashed, from her preppy persona to her mainstream dance pop numbers. Basically, she wasn't black enough, a struggle she had to endure as well in her childhood, when she was bullied by other black kids for being light-skinned. The black community became more accepting of Whitney during the 90s, when she included more urban and soulful elements in her music, and following her marriage to Bobby Brown. But Whitney's so-called selling out was the reason why other black R&B or urban female acts managed to break into the mainstream, such as Anita Baker and Janet Jackson. And to end this on a more positive note, Whitney had always been supportive of real talent and against industry plans, and she often showed her love for the new singers coming along the way. She wasn't a fan of Paula Abdul singing off-key on the record, but she was more outspoken in her support for artists like Brandy and Destiny's Child. Including when the media tried to pit her against Mariah and Madonna, Whitney explained any vocal similarity between her and Mariah is simply due to both having the same influences, while defending Madonna's outrageous public persona, making it clear that an outfit like the cone bra is a stage prop, not something Madonna wears in her private life. With over a decade since her passing, it's still hard to accept Whitney isn't with us anymore, especially since her music continues to live on. It's hard to imagine anyone replacing Whitney, because that's impossible, and that's why she's an icon. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Take care.